Welcome everyone to /strange. This is episode 9. We're going to be covering reincarnation today. And some stories of reincarnation. Mostly in children, young children. Most forget by the age of 7 or 8, which I guess in the cultures that put a lot of emphasis and belief in reincarnation, that's like common. That's like...
Just like that they don't carry over that knowledge until adulthood.
Right. The eye, your third eye, that whole philosophy of the third eye is way more open and accepting of the real reality around you. And that once the world starts weighing down on you and all that stuff.
They say that a lot with kids and like paranormal stuff in general, like ghosts and stuff like that.
They're way more open to it because they have less like fundamental things pounded on top of their belief structure type thing.
Yeah.
So
reincarnation today.
Yeah, we got some fun, interesting stories. They're creepy because they involve children, and children are always creepy.
Children are creepy always.
Always. I think we're gonna start with the story of Ryan, the Hollywood extra, and his story is pretty simple. He talked about a bunch of lavish things about his former life in Hollywood and all these things, and a lot of times with reincarnation stories, and this is why this one's a little bit unique, like a kid will kind of tell these like events of his former life, like his previous mother, his previous father, like these things like this. But in Ryan's case, he like pointed to his previous self in a photo from a still of a movie from like the 20s, I believe. 20s or 30s.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Black and white, old film. And he pointed to an extra in Hollywood known as Marty Martin. And so instead of having all these details and trying to find someone who matches those details, now we have a person that we're comparing the details to from the get-go. And so that's why it's a little different than some of the other ones. Because a lot of times there's not just like pictures readily available of these people. And...
Well, in a lot of these stories, like they'll say like, "Oh, I was this person in a past life" or whatever, and people kind of think it's a bullshit. But then they start to kind of like recall things that nobody really would know about that person, or just
events like,
especially when they're kids. Like, how do you know?
Like, how would a kid know some of this information? Like one of the stories ahead about the kid who was a fighter pilot. Some of that stuff is like, how could a kid possibly know this much about a plane at 3 years old when his parents have no like interest or knowledge or background in aviation or planes, especially planes from World War II. Right. So they did a special on ABC or NBC on Ryan and his story, and essentially he always talked about how he missed an orange soda that was around back in the 20s, and that he, and with one of his marriages, he went to Paris, and he essentially explained this like mansion that he lived in and the servants that he had and all these like lavish details, which is like, wait a minute, kid, how does a Hollywood extra live this life of luxury? Because like, it's, it wasn't a star. We're not talking about like, so, and then he talked about how he was an extra for a while, but he actually became like a talent agent and had some big clients under him, and that's how he made all of his money. And he talked about how he had married a couple times, and that Marty Martin ended up being married like 3 times. With his third wife, he went to Paris for a few months and lived. He talked about how he lived. Ryan talked about how he lived on a road with rock in it or something of that nature, and that ended up being correct. It was like Gravel Boulevard or Rock Boulevard. It was close enough to where it was like, yeah, that's a random shot in the dark that you hit again. And everything that the kid essentially started explaining about this random Hollywood extra that literally no one on earth probably even remembered except for a handful of people. All these details about his life were like dead on and precise.
Oh yeah, it says Ryan his address had rock or like a mount in it, and his address was Roxbury.
Roxbury, that's what it was.
And then he also said that Ryan said that he owned a piano And Marty Martin had a bunch of pianos. He described his swimming pool, had a large swimming pool.
Yeah, like all these like minute details about like things that you just wouldn't be able to know without like being closely related or being with that person.
Yeah.
In some fashion during their life. And it wasn't someone who was like, I was President Eisenhower.
Right.
And where there's like 9,000 pages on this person's life that you can grab details of.
Yeah, and these stories are actually more believable too because they're not like, yeah, like I was President Eisenhower, like I was Elvis. Like, come on. There's a lot of people that claim reincarnation, but have you ever noticed that they always, like a lot of them that are bullshitting, always say that they're like some sort of king or something from like
right.
the past.
Right.
Like
it's
not
way
everyone
more
is a king.
like extravagant than like yeah. There's way more peasants than there were kings.
Right.
And so and it is kind of bizarre. I realized that we forgot one of our stories when we were listing them out.
Oh.
The boy who was his own grandfather.
I don't know if I remember that one.
It's a really quick and simple one.
Oh, okay.
The bare essentials of it is like around like right when kids first start talking, dad was changing the son's diaper, right? Mm-hmm. And the kid looked at him dead in the face and goes, when I was your age, I used to do this for you. Super weird thing for a kid to say. And the kid was really young. His grandfather had died the year before he was born, so he had like no real knowledge of him. And being only 2 or 3, you know, the parents hadn't really told him a whole lot. And they showed him a photo, and like the parents were like testing him because he was essentially claiming to be his own grandfather. They showed him a picture from his grandfather's youth when he was a young boy, and it was with like 10 other boys. It was like a group photo of a bunch of young boys. And he was like, yep, there I am right there, and just pointed himself out, like on, you know, hadn't even really seen photos of his grandfather as like an older
this kid is
man.
like not that old either.
Like
so
2 or 3.
Yeah.
And like there's one of his like grandfathers, a teenager, like, oh, there's my car. And it was like his grandfather's first car that he was like in love with.
Well, like even just the way he said it, like, oh, when I was your age, I would do this for you. Like 3-year-olds not talk that way.
Right.
They're like,
right.
They don't, you know.
And then the creepiest thing is he said, you know, someone turned my sister into a fish. And this is something that you may like share with your son or daughter when they're older. Mm-hmm. But when the grandfather was younger, his sister was actually murdered and thrown into the river. Mm. So, like, the fact that this 3-year-old just knew this information.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's pretty much the gist of the story and, like, most of the big details, but it's just, like...
super creepy, man.
Right, like...
I don't know how I would react to that. Like, my 3-year-old, like, was... like, I would just be like, I guess it's true. Like...
I got my first one on the way.
Sure. Yeah.
It's gonna be creepy, man.
Yeah. I know kids say creepy shit, but then when they can back it up with information, you're like, okay. So our next story is also about kids. It's a story about the Pollock twins. So there were 2 people, man and wife, John and Florence Pollock. They had 2 daughters, named Jacqueline, who was 6, and Joanna, who was 11. So they were 5 years apart. Tragically, an out-of-control car struck both of the kids in 1957.
With one of their friends, if I remember.
Was it?
I think it was like the 2 sisters and a friend.
Oh, did the friend die?
That's not. Yeah, it's not really super relevant. But.
Well, their parents obviously destroyed by that, like as any parent would be. But they did try to. They did have hopes that they would have more kids in the future. 1 year later, after that.
One note.
Yeah.
Real quick. Because I read this story on a handful of different things, and I only found one that stated this, so I have no idea how much truth there is to it. Or actually, go on. Actually, I'm getting ahead of myself.
Okay.
I don't want to cut off if you actually have that bit of information. So.
Well, 1 year later, apparently Florence became pregnant. They visited the doctor. Doctor said, "Yep, we see one child." But the husband, John, was convinced somehow that she would have two. She would have twins, and I believe he even called it from the beginning. He said that they would be the souls of.
That's the thing I only found on like one of the articles, like because I read that story 2 or 3 times, and then like the 4th time I found a piece on it. It was like the dad was like, "Yep, here comes my reincarnated daughter."
Which is super weird, just to be like, yeah, like especially when you go to the doctor and the doctor literally like yep,
nope, there's one in there for
and then
sure.
The dad's like, nope, 2. So
and they're my reincarnated first daughters,
right? So in 1958, sure enough, 2 twins are born. They're named Jillian and Jennifer. Apparently, Jennifer had a white line on her forehead, which matched pretty exact to where from a bicycle accident that Jacqueline, one of the other kids, had. She also had a birthmark identical to Jacqueline's.
On her leg, right?
I don't remember where.
I think it was on her calf, if I remember correctly. Which, that's like a huge thing in the reincarnation world.
Like birthmarks?
Birthmarks are usually somehow either the previous one had the exact birthmark, or with our final story tonight, the birthmark was like representative of like a death, injury, or wound.
Just kind of like this. Well, not this was a death injury, but the white line was like a bike accident or something.
Well, and I wonder if that birthmark is carried over from reincarnation to reincarnation. Like maybe it was eventually at one point.
Oh yeah.
Maybe she was Achilles.
Reincarnated like 4 times.
She was Achilles at one point in her reincarnation chain.
Got that mark
got that ankle. Got that ankle slice. But I don't know. I just think I find that interesting that birthmarks are such like a big staple in the reincarnation. Sure. So.
Apparently they moved away. I'm not sure why, but they moved away from that town for a few years. Well, yeah, maybe.
I mean, I can understand why. I mean, I'd probably want a fresh start because they moved and then had the kids.
Oh, did they?
Yeah, they moved away and then essentially started a new life.
Okay, so they moved away, had the kids. Well, they returned 3.5, 4 years later to that town, and when they got back with their daughters began to look around and point out, businesses, landmarks around the area. At one point, they passed the element or the local school, and they said that they attended it, which they never.
There's our school, Daddy.
There's our school, and they were like, no,
never been there. Never even been to this town.
Never even been to the town. So they started the family. The mother and father started to dig out some of the old possessions of Jacqueline and Joanna, and the twins correctly named the name of the teddy bear doll that the deceased sisters had owned.
Right, when you're talking about young kids, you're not going to be dropping all this knowledge about, you had 2 other sisters who died, and here's their teddy bears and their names, so.
And then the mother, Florence, apparently, this is super creepy to me, started to notice the girls were playing weird games, and I say games quote.
Yeah.
One of the games involved Jennifer laying on the floor, holding the head of her sister, Jillian, in her hands, and she would just calmly tell her, she had blood coming out of her head or eyes or whatever.
Because this is where the car hit you.
Yeah. Super creepy. Month or 2 later, the girls were sitting in a car with the engine that was just kind of sitting there. It was running. And they started just screaming at the top of their voices that the car was coming to get us. The car is coming to get us. And apparently when they turned, like you said earlier, it's 5 or 6 or something like that, they just totally
all those memories and all those essentially the first daughter's memories kind of just fade.
Yeah. And
it happens. It's you can set a watch by it, just how frequently it is the 7 or 8, somewhere between 6 to 8.
Notice that a super common theme that happens.
Yeah, and it is. It's really,
dude. That's so creepy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah, well, and that one is, and some of the, I guess the hoax believers and stuff like that. And I'm not saying it's not possible that the kid could hit on a couple notes of correctness.
Yeah.
And then parent, especially stuff with like, grandpa or my previous daughters and blah blah blah, like things like that, where there's like a lot of emotion tied to the reincarnation, as opposed to like I was a fighter pilot or I was a Hollywood extra who you never knew, mom or dad.
Right.
That parents could possibly, even without realizing it,
start dropping hints or like reacting in a certain way that like
and even putting the like, oh, they said this, which was kind of like this.
Putting things together that don't really relate.
Like forcing the pieces together, and then by the time you hear the story, and I don't know, I don't know how much of that happens in these. It's definitely possible, but yeah, it's just creepy. Yeah, it's super creepy, man.
Yeah,
which I think that brings us to James Ligner, the fighter pilot.
And I haven't heard much of this one, so
well, so there's actually a lot to it. I'm going to try to condense it down a little bit. Otherwise, we could be here for 2 hours. This one and the next story are going to be condensed because there's so much information. And if this stuff sparks your interest, go look up these stories. You can find them. I think when I sent you the list, I literally was like, what? Like James, the fighter pilot. And like, I don't know if you Googled that, but if you Googled that, you would have found exactly the story.
Oh, really?
Like, almost everything I put on here, you could type that in and find the story, where it's just like, Ryan, the Hollywood extra. So, James, at a little age, was obsessed with planes. At like 1 or 2, that's all he wanted to play with. And then all of a sudden, he just started getting horrible nightmares about the planes. And he'd be woken up and he would say things like, fire, fire, little boy can't get out. And
super creepy.
No, it's not.
That's not creepy at all.
No.
Like you're sitting there watching TV, you just hear that shit.
And he started to get like kind of weirded out by planes for a little bit during this. And the parents were really worried about it, and they were taking him to people. And someone that they eventually took him to said that it's possible that he might be having like a past life memory type situation, and recommended a specialist who kind of dealt, because there's a lot of psychiatrists and I guess scientists who focus in past life memory within children, because it is very intriguing and interesting subject. And I think it helps that they're kids, because kids are,
they don't
naturally
have any
pure.
And they don't have anything to gain. They don't understand that they can sell their story or like whatever. They don't have that motive, I think.
Right. And essentially, as James started telling details, his dad was looking at like a World War II book of some of the islands off of Iwo Jima and some of the places where we had battled over in Asia against Japan. And he's like, and he just pointed to the map and he's like, that's where I went down. And, his parents were like way not believer in this stuff at all. Just like really just pushing it off. Like, no, there has to be a logical explanation to it. And I remember like the mom bought him a plane, and underneath of it, it had like a missile on the wing. And she was like, "Oh yeah, look at the missile." And he's like, "No, mom, that's a an extra fuel tank on that type of plane." Well, fucking 3-year-old.
Oh, like that little oblong.
Yeah, like I didn't know that. Like, how the fuck do you know that?
Yeah.
And he talked about like the type of plane, which was like a Cutler or I can't remember the exact model. But as it just kept going deeper and deeper, his dad kind of became obsessed with disproving that it was reincarnation. So he kept searching for like facts and details. And James even said like the name of the ship that he the aircraft carrier that he like took off from.
Damn.
And stuff. And he, and the dad would found out like that was a real carrier that was in the East Pacific that was there at the time when the kid said it was. And they asked him like, well, James, who are you talking about? And he's like, James. It was James. And the pilot that he ended up being a reincarnation of, his name was James as well, which is just like a weird coincidence. But it was James the second. And So the kid James started signing all of his drawings and everything, and he would draw like 3-year-old drawing like dog fights of planes in the air.
Yeah, it looked like accurate.
And he signs them James 3. Because even though he's technically like the third, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is just kind of like weird. But so like I said, his dad was trying to disprove it, and the kid would talk about how he took a direct hit in the engine and he couldn't get the cockpit open, and so his dad found that the Courier was really, I mean, he was calling like historical places,
like
on
museums and stuff,
like that specialized in like the aircraft stuff, and who specialized in World War II stuff and all these things. And he found out that the plane that he said that he used was not actually on that Courier. And he's like, okay, here we go. Here's a possible like thing. Like, here's something that is
something
wrong.
that might disprove it.
And then when he finally tracked down the pilot that died and he made that connection, he found out that pilot had recently just transferred to this Courier. And prior to that, he was a part of a special flight crew force. And the planes that they flew in that flight, of course, were the plane that James was talking about.
So he thought
he had just switched to a different plane with this different crew from the carrier. And you remember him telling him, he's like, yeah, it's like the problem with these planes is like the tires are bad. You always end up veering left when you're trying to land. And apparently, like, he did some research, and the plane that he was referring to literally had the problem with the tires and the way that it hit. The tires weren't built really well, and they would pop constantly whenever the plane would come into land.
Dude, that's so specific.
Like, yeah, it's super specific. Well, as it goes on, and all these other little details start coming together, he was trying to find, the guy talked about like his wingman, like one of the pilots that flew with him a lot when he was on the Courier, and Dad could find like no record of this person existing. But his dad was searching for people who were dead, because this was like 2007, I think. And it's someone from World War II.
I was going to say it would have to be like pretty recent, because World War II.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, yeah, well, the kid, it was like 3 or 4 in like 2007-ish range or whatever, but he ended up tracking this guy down, but he was still alive, and that's why he couldn't find him, because he was looking through records of deceased soldiers.
Yeah,
and this guy was still alive. And that guy was like, James was with us when we attacked, and I saw him take a direct hit to the front of his plane, and no one ever saw him after that. No one saw where it went down. No one saw anything else.
This was like a guy that was with him?
Like literally flying next to the actual
wow.
So essentially just 100%. At that point, the dad was like, my son is the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. And this one is so bizarre in my opinion, because the sister of the fighter pilot was still alive.
Of James?
Yeah, like that fighter pilot who died in World War II. And the dad had called and talked and asked about her brother and found details out about his life and things like that. More or less taking away any doubt at this
Trying
point.
to get as much info about that past person. And
eventually, after they had become kind of friends and talked and stuff like that, kind of filled her in on what was going on with his son. And she had talked to him. And based on the conversations they had, she literally started calling him like her little brother, and he was calling her sis. And she had a bunch of her brother James's stuff that was sent back to her, like a bust of Einstein, I think it was, and some other things that her brother really loved. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I feel like your son should have these, since
so his own sister felt so strongly enough
based on just the conversations they had. And they don't really ever talk about what they talked about. I assume that maybe even the parents don't fully know, because it might have been like the sister probably wanting, like, let me talk to him alone.
Right.
But yeah, like she shipped her brother's things to this random family, to this kid, because she felt that there was, even if it wasn't like her brother fully reincarnated, there was some attachment to her brother in some way with this kid. And so she wanted him to have these things. So
that story is fucking fascinating, dude. Like, dude, I'm actually kind of glad that I didn't know that much about it because I was able to just like listen and be like, wow.
Yeah. No, read up on it. Like I said, I think the article I read was forever long. Yeah. It was like there's so much detail on it.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
So yeah, James the fighter pilot. What does that move us to?
So I think going to Dorothy, which is another long one.
Yeah, Dorothy Eady's story. This is a unique one because she retained one, it wasn't like, or I can't say it wasn't. We don't know how the reincarnation worked fully because we don't know if it was from the birth of Dorothy or if it was at an event that happened when she was 3. Which sounds odd because most of the time these kids start showing memories or little tidbits of this recollection of things they shouldn't know around like right when they start talking. So by 3 they're usually already in full swing of stories and memories.
Right. And you don't know if they have any knowledge before that because they can't express it to you.
Right. Well, and so Dorothy Eady, British.
She was born in London, 1904.
1904. She lived till 78, I want to say.
Yeah, somewhere.
At 3 years old, she fell. And prior to this, there was nothing the family talked about as far as any stories regarding any sort of like past life stories or memories. So she fell down the stairs and essentially hit extremely hard. And the family called for the family doctor because that was back in the times where like you would like literally call the house and the doctor would run over and like there's like a doctor in the neighborhood or within a
which I think
range.
we should go back to that because I want to have a doctor come to my house instead of going in.
Doctor showed up, pronounced her dead, and the family agreed in sorrow. He went back and got his nurse to come and do some final things, and when he came back, he was like, oh, she's not dead. So, and that's what I meant by, like, we don't know. So, we don't know if maybe Dorothy passed away that day. But, however this works, because none of us truly know or understand how it works, she was put back.
Yeah.
And maybe not Dorothy, but...
It's like another soul, I guess, for lack of a better term, just put back.
And everything was pretty much normal for another couple of years. And then they took her to an Egyptian museum of like an exhibit. Yep. And as soon as she walked in, and it had all these like statues of like the Egyptian gods and certain pharaohs, and she just started running around and kissing the feet of the statues, which is super weird. And whenever it came time to like go, she was like, "No, I want to stay with my people."
Well, and she also apparently saw like a photograph in there, and she said, "This is my home, but where are all the trees and the gardens?" So like she recognized the building, and apparently the I don't think it might have been a photo, but like a painting.
Right.
It was of a building. It was a temple dedicated to Seti the First, who was the father of Ramses the Great.
Yeah.
So that happened in there too.
So essentially, she ends up having this obsession with Egyptian culture, and claims to be reincarnated from, and that she essentially was a priestess of Seti the First, right, or second?
First.
And essentially fell in love with a man when she wasn't supposed to, because the priestess of her order were like, it was like a celibacy thing, similar to like the nuns,
like a virgin
priests. Yeah. Well, she ended up getting pregnant by this man, and the priest of the temple was like, "Well, now you're gonna die because that's a grave."
And she had all these memories of this, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And like this is like the story she told of her previous life.
Seti the First ruled from 1290 BC to 1279 BC. So that's like the time period that we're talking about.
Yeah. And instead of letting them execute her, she ended up taking her own life. And that was like essentially her story as the priestess. But unlike a lot of these stories, because like I said, she had the event where she died at 3 or didn't die.
Was pronounced anyway.
Yes. And it wasn't for a couple of years after that like the Egyptian thing started happening. So you're already talking about 5 or 6, which is getting towards that period where they start to forget.
Right.
But hers like kicks into overdrive here. She like mastered hieroglyphics at a really young age of like 10, and people were like blown away that she was like able to pick it up like that. And
she didn't have any like history in any of that.
No.
Like, just...
Well, I mean, other than her past life.
Yeah. Right.
And she was like, well, I'm not learning a language. I'm just relearning some things I forgot. Creepy fucking statement to say.
Right.
But she ends up growing up. She gets married and moves to Egypt. And when she gets there, she just gets down on the ground, kisses the dirt, and says, I'm home and I will never leave again. She spends the rest of her life there. She has a son who she names... I don't know if you have her son's name in there.
I don't think so, but I can...
But there was like a famous... there's like a... So we all know that the times like this were very...
their son was... She apparently named their son Seti. Also.
Seti. I don't remember if it was Seti or something like right at that. Like,
yeah, it's
something,
like spelled different. But
what essentially happened was the people in the area who lived in this Egyptian area that she moved to were fascinated by her. They 100% believed her. They had no doubt in anything that she said. They would show up to just listen to her tell her stories about the way it used to be. And like I said, this all the way till the day she died, she held on to this. Like, she even wanted to be like put in a tomb in a similar style of the way they did then, which apparently she ended up being just put in an unmarked grave somewhere, which is kind of sad.
It is sad.
And like I said, like women of the time, a lot of times their names were irrelevant, not to sound like sexist, but like what it would end up being is, I can't remember the Egyptian word for it, but it's essentially the Egyptian word for mother.
Seti, right?
Yeah, so she became known as Seti. Her son was Seti. She was the mother, so people referred to her as Seti. And that was like a fucking... I don't know why fucking was necessary there.
It was like a fucking ridiculous...
Like, that was like a common occurrence for like how they would do things. Like, you're a woman, but you're known for your son now. You had a son, you did what you were supposed to. Good job.
Right.
Which
so
is
it's almost like a... Yeah, it's almost like if you gave birth to a king or something, like you're known for that person's achievements or whatever. Right.
So, but she was fine with it because that was how she saw the thing, how it was supposed to be. And a lot of people, as long as it went on, she was old enough to be able to learn and adapt and like take in enough information and knowledge to be an expert on Egyptian everything. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of people just think that that's what she kind of did, and that it was kind of like the early stuff was just like a weirdity, like an oddity of hers, and then she just turned it into this whole like story. But the people who lived there, who knew the culture, and who reincarnation wasn't like an illogical impossibility, it's part of their culture. They believed and accepted her fully, and she even ended up helping like archaeologists find, like, she's like was in an area of where one of Seti's areas, and it's like, there used to be a garden here, and I would come and sit and think all the time. And like, sure enough, like when they excavated the site in the area she was talking about, underneath a bunch of rubble and stone, they found this garden area there, well, at least what they believed it was. And she also helped like discover some like passages into some hidden chambers of some areas that they didn't really know.
Because she kind of like remembered it, I guess.
Yeah, she just like remembered it from there. And unlike most of the children who forgot, and I don't know if it's because of like, instead of being reborn with part of this essence or soul, that she was placed there when the child died at 3 maybe. Right. But like, she retained all of her memories and knowledge through all of her life.
Yeah.
She never
that's
forgot.
Kind of a little different story, like a different twist to it. So
right, and like I said, there's a whole bunch of other little bits and details and other things about her. She was really interesting. It would have been like a person that would have been pretty cool to like meet.
Yeah.
But like I said, she died in the 70s or 80s before we were born. So we had zero chance of meeting her.
Yeah.
So
Well, maybe she'll be reincarnated again.
We can meet the next one.
Yeah.
Maybe she'll be obsessed with Britain this time.
Maybe she's an Egyptian, like obsessed with Britain. That's hilarious.
But yeah, I don't know. So yeah, that's the Dorothy Eady story, and it's pretty cool, pretty neat. I think that leaves us to our favorite.
Yeah, which is simply known as the boy who solved his own murder.
Yeah, Google that shit. The boy who solved his own murder. You'll find it.
Yep.
You won't find the boy's name.
Nope.
This came from a book titled "The Children Who Lived Before," I believe is what the title of the book was called.
I don't remember.
It was like the children who lived before the children who once lived. It was a book essentially collected by a doctor who
is an Israeli physician.
Yeah, he did a massive like grouping and studying of like children in their past life memories.
Yeah, Dr. Eli Lash. So
and he was present for this entire event.
Yeah. So takes place near Syria. There's a kid who has a red birthmark on his head. I'm not sure exactly why that was important, but it's in there. But because of the birthmark thing.
Yeah.
So as soon as he's able to speak at the age of like 3, maybe about 4, he starts just telling people that he's like, I was reincarnated.
I lived in a village not far from here.
Yeah, I lived in a village not far from here, and I was murdered.
Well, and it's in the culture, like, because that area, like the Middle East, especially, reincarnation is like a huge thing.
Is it?
Yeah, that's like, India, like all that stuff, like big that belief. Like big area and expanded outward, to the point that like elders in these small villages, elders, like when a kid comes to them with this, the elders are like tasked with helping them find as much information or details, or even taking them to a village they said they used to be from, if it's within like possibility. And obviously, if they're like in the Middle East, like in a tiny village, you're not gonna be like, I gotta go to California. Like, they're not gonna do that. Right. But like, so I just found that really interesting. That like, that's like how strong the belief system is that like elders are tasked with helping these children kind of come to terms and prove the like reality of what they're saying, as opposed to here where we're like trying to disprove it from the word go. Yeah. So,
well, apparently during this time, that was when that Dr. Eli Lash was around. He was a physician in Israel, and he had like a really big interest in reincarnation, just kind of like the elders, I guess, that part of that culture. So the kid's parents contacted him, and they say, come and talk to our son about this and see what you can find out. So they apparently took him into 2 towns, which he didn't recognize, but then they took him to a third one, and he said, yep, this was my village. When he got there, he was actually able to recall his original last name and the first and last name of his murderer, and everybody's like, where is he? Like, let's go.
Well, and I don't know if you have that. Like there was like villagers who like recognized the name he gave for who he was, and they're like, "Oh, that guy," because the kid was like 3.
And they're like, "Yeah, that guy disappeared.
He disappeared like 4 years ago," and they just assumed that they lived on the border of like some of the Palestine, like some of the.
So they thought maybe just.
So he just got lost in the night maybe and crossed that border, and apparently this is very common. You get on the wrong side of that line, and you can get shot and done and disappeared essentially. So they just assumed that that's what happened to that guy.
So they were walking around, apparently like you said, people were able to start piecing things together. He's able to find his old home. So like he brought people to his home. He's like, this is where I lived previously. And then I guess it was like, I don't know how close it was, but it was like a neighbor around the area. Like he confronted him. He straight up went up to him
and said the dude's name.
Yeah, he's like said his name. I don't have his name, but
and the guy turned around like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, and they've never met before. There's no way that the kid would know his name. And he said, I used to be your neighbor. We had a fight, and you killed me with an axe.
To the head, where a birthmark was on the kid.
Coincidental. So apparently the man got like super spooked about it because he's like, yeah, that's true.
I think the doctor said it's like his face was void of all color, like went white, like sheet.
And then he said, I even know where you buried my body. So then he's like, come with me, I'll show you. Took the accused murderer, the doctor, and they had a couple of people with him. He went over, they found where he had put the axe, and they ended up finding his body. And the murderer, like, he confessed. He said, you got me. Super, super crazy.
I was always, like, that really intrigues me, because he's like, I know where you buried me. And he took him over, and he's like, yeah, see that pile of rocks, he buried me under that. And he buried the axe over there. Like, so... Did he hit him with the axe, and did it not, like, kill him right away? And he was buried alive-ish?
Yeah.
Or was it something like the soul leaving the body and him seeing it as, like, before he went wherever they go? You know what I mean? Like I'm wondering, like, how he knows that part of where he was buried.
Oh, where he was buried? Well, if he was just killed and buried right where he was...
Killed?
Yeah. But
then also where the axe was buried.
That's true.
Because it was buried, like, not far from the body, but at a different spot in the field.
I didn't even think about that. That's like a totally different mystery also.
Well, right, yeah, because, so was he still somewhat alive, and therefore that's why he knew where he was buried, because he didn't really die until after he was buried, and that's when he lost enough blood or oxygen and actually passed? Or was there some sort of, where people talk about how, like, they float above their bodies?
Yeah.
And then, like, he witnessed him do these things before he moved on to the great beyond?
Yeah, it's just... I don't know, that's another mystery.
Like, I don't know, that always was like... I was always like, how? How did you know this part? Like, were you still alive? Did he bury you fucking alive? Is this dude a fucking bastard?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, he hit you with an axe, so obviously he's a bastard. I wonder what they were fighting over. I've never been in an argument with someone where I was like, you know what will solve this problem I'm having with my neighbor? An axe to the dome. Like,
I actually had that moment the other day with one of my neighbors. No, not really. But one of my neighbors pissed me off the other day, but I never took it that far where I was just taking an axe to them.
Better not, dude. They're gonna come back and point to finger.
What's hilarious is, like, you're like, I've never had that thought, and then I was like, I did, and you're like,
I totally did.
No, not really.
Well, all right then.
Not
yeah,
really.
so those are was that 5, 6 tales of reincarnation?
Yeah, I think 5.
Well, I added that one.
Oh yeah,
I slammed that one in there about the boy who was his
Ryan
own
the Hollywood Extra, just in case you want to look him up. Pollock twins, Dorothy Eady.
Yeah, the boy who was his own grandfather.
Yep.
James the fighter pilot.
And then the boy who solved his own murder.
The boy who solved his own murder. And this is just literally a drop in an ocean of stories that you can find out there. Like I said, that doctor like wrote an entire book of different stories. Like, he traveled the country to country, following up leads and stories on children with these type of stories, and studied them and read them. I think it'd be a really interesting book to read, honestly. And like I said, I want to verify the title because I want to get that right.
Dr. Eli Lash died in 2009, but he still wrote his book.
Eli Lash.
Lasch.
Because like I said, I'm pretty sure it's called The Children Who Lived Before.
I mean, that would make sense, that title. It's just all about reincarnation.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost all of it. Yeah, the children who have lived before, Reincarnation Today, is the name of the book. So yeah, there's some more strange for you. Yeah, there's a lot out to this world, and it's just getting weirder and weirder the deeper we dig. So yeah. I hope you guys are enjoying it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. It really, really helps us out. We're really trying to push to get to that 100 subscriber mark. So,
and really helps if you like, if you have people that are into this sort of thing too, you can share it, like post that up,
Post that up for us, man. Help us out. We keep trying to bring this to you week to week. I know we've been a little scattered brain with the shit and not every week as we plan, but life.
Yeah.
So, and if you like, as always, if you have a topic you want us to look into, or you have some questions regarding any of the topics that you want a little bit more information on, feel free to leave a comment, email us. All of our information is below where you can kind of get in contact with us. We'd love to look at any stories you guys are interested in and kind of do what we do with the ones we're currently doing. So,
Yup.
Sounds
great.
And always try not to get murdered. So, have a good one. Enjoy yourself. And until next week, life is strange.